In the heart of the African continent, along the banks of the majestic White Nile, lie the lands of the Shilluk people. This group, numbering around 300,000, is known for its rich history, unique culture, and complex social structure. For centuries, the Shilluk have developed their own ways of adapting to the environment, creating their own laws and customs that govern their lives. One of the most interesting and thought-provoking aspects of their culture is the role of the king, known as the Reth. The Reth is not just a political leader, he is the living embodiment of the nation, a link between the world of the living and the world of spirits, a guarantor of the land's fertility and the people's well-being. But what responsibilities does the Reth bear? What rights are granted to him? And how does his role affect the life of every member of the Shilluk community? Let's try to understand this complex and multifaceted picture, setting aside prejudices and looking at it from the perspective of anthropology and cultural evolution.
As we live on this riverbank, the season of rains and droughts, harvests and hunts, our ancestors have lived on this land for centuries, passing down their knowledge, customs, and beliefs from generation to generation. And at the head of this community stands the Ref, a man endowed with immense power and responsibility. His word is law, his decision is final. But what if his power extends not only to the fate of your harvest, but also to the fate of your family? What if an ancient custom allows him to choose any woman in the tribe for himself? How does this affect the social structure of society? How does it affect the relationships between men and women? And how do the Shilluk themselves view this tradition, which seems so strange and even barbaric to us, representatives of Western culture?
To understand this complex system, it's necessary to delve into the history and culture of the Shilluk, to study their social norms and beliefs, to understand how they themselves explain and justify their traditions. Only then can we see the logic and meaning behind the seeming cruelty and injustice which lie at the heart of this unique social adaptation. So let's embark on this fascinating journey into the world of the Shilluk to learn more about their lives, their customs, and their king. The power and responsibility of the Reth, not just privileges, but a burden. The Reth occupies a central place in the life of the Shilluk people. He is not just a chief or ruler, he is the embodiment of the spirit of the ancestors, a symbol of unity and prosperity. His power is considered divine, and he is responsible for the well-being of the entire nation. But the Reth's power is not just privileges, it's also a huge burden of responsibility. The Reth must be wise and just. He must make decisions that will benefit the entire nation. He must be a warrior, capable of defending his land from enemies. He must be a priest, capable of communicating with the spirits of the ancestors and ensuring the fertility of the land. The Reth is the father of the nation, its protector and mentor. However, as in any human system, the Reth's power is not absolute. He is limited by a council of elders who represent the interests of various clans and families. The Council of Elders can influence the Reth's decisions and even remove him if he abuses his power. The tradition in question is part of a complex system of social relations and cultural norms. It's connected to the Reth's role as a symbol of fertility and prosperity. In some African cultures, including the Shilluk, the ruler is considered responsible for the fertility of the land and the health of the people. Therefore, his personal life, including his choice of wives, may be seen as having an important impact on the well-being of the entire society. From this point of view, the Reth's choice of women can be seen not only as a manifestation of power, but also as a ritual act aimed at ensuring fertility and prosperity. The women chosen by the Reth occupy a special position in society, and their children are considered descendants of the ruling dynasty. Of course, this tradition raises questions about women's rights and justice. However, it's important to understand that in traditional societies, the concept of individual rights may differ from Western notions. In such societies, greater importance is attached to collective interests and social harmony.
The role of women in Shilluk society, between tradition and modernity. Women play an important role in Shilluk society despite their seeming subordination. They are the keepers of the home, the educators of children, and the workers in the fields. Shilluk women have significant economic independence. They own land, livestock, and trade in the markets. In traditional Shilluk culture, women have a voice in the resolution of many issues concerning their families and communities. They participate in councils of elders, and their opinions are taken into account when making important decisions. However, the position of women in Shilluk society is not clear-cut. They are discriminated against in some areas, such as politics and education. In addition, they face problems of violence and exploitation. In recent years, the situation has begun to change. More and more women are getting an education and holding leadership positions. They are fighting for their rights and for equality with men. The tradition of the Reth choosing women is certainly controversial from the point of view of modern notions of human rights. However, it's important to understand that this tradition has deep roots in Shilluk culture, and it cannot be changed overnight.
Social consequences and adaptation. How society reacts to tradition. The tradition of the Reth choosing women has a profound impact on the social structure of Shilluk society. It affects the relationships between men and women, marital relations, the system of inheritance, and the distribution of power. Shilluk men whose wives have been chosen by the Reth find themselves in a difficult position. On the one hand, they experience feelings of humiliation and jealousy. On the other hand, they receive certain privileges and respect from society. Women chosen by the Reth hold a special position. They become part of the ruling elite, and their children are considered descendants of the ruling dynasty. However, they also face envy and animosity from other women. The Shilluk society has developed various mechanisms to adapt to this tradition. For example, there are special rituals and customs that regulate the relationships between the Reth and his wives, as well as between the Reth's wives and other members of society. In addition, the Shilluk society is constantly evolving, and the tradition of choosing women by the Reth is gradually losing its relevance. More and more people are advocating for the abolition of this tradition, considering it outdated and unfair. An anthropological view. Understanding through context and comparison. From an anthropological point of view, the tradition of choosing women by the Reth is a unique social phenomenon that needs to be understood in the context of the Shilluk culture and history. Anthropologists strive to study this tradition not by judging it, but by trying to understand its meaning and significance for the members of society. One of the tasks of anthropology is to compare different cultures and identify common patterns and differences. In this context, the tradition of choosing women by the Reth can be compared with other forms of polygamy and matriarchy that are found in various cultures around the world. For example, in some African cultures, polygamy is a common practice, and men have the right to have several wives. In other cultures, on the contrary, women occupy a dominant position in society, and they have the right to choose their husbands. Comparing the tradition of choosing women by the Reth with other cultural phenomena allows us to better understand its features and its place in human history. The evolution of traditions, from the past to the future. Traditions are not static. They are constantly evolving and changing under the influence of various factors. The tradition of choosing women by the Reth is no exception. It originated in the distant past when the Shilluk society was more isolated and conservative. Currently, under the influence of globalization and modernization, the Shilluk society is undergoing significant changes. More and more people are getting an education, migrating to cities, and getting acquainted with other cultures. These changes are influencing the tradition of choosing women by the reth. More and more people are advocating for the abolition of this tradition, considering it outdated and unfair. They demand respect for women's rights and equality between men and women. The future of the tradition of choosing women by the reth remains uncertain. It is possible that it will be abolished completely, or it may be transformed and adapted to modern conditions. In any case, it is important to remember that traditions are part of culture, and their change should happen gradually and taking into account the opinions of all members of society. The influence of the environment and adaptation to it. How traditions help to survive. It is important to understand that many traditions, including controversial ones, arise as a way to adapt to the environment and ensure the survival of society. The Shilluk, living in harsh natural conditions, have developed their own survival strategies, which are reflected in their culture and traditions. For example, in conditions of limited resources and high mortality, polygamy may be a way to ensure the survival of the clan, as it increases the number of offspring. In addition, in conditions of frequent wars and conflicts, a strong leader with power and authority may be necessary to protect the community. The tradition of choosing women by the reth can be seen as one element of this survival strategy. It may be a way to strengthen the reth's power, ensure his loyalty from members of society, and increase the number of his offspring. However, it is important to understand that traditions that were once useful can become outdated and harmful in new conditions. Therefore, it is necessary to constantly review traditions and adapt them to modern realities. Education and progress, the key to change and development. Education plays a key role in the change and development of society. Educated people think more critically. They better understand their rights and obligations, and they are more capable of making decisions that will benefit the entire society. In the Shilluk society, education is becoming more and more accessible. More and more children are attending schools and getting higher education. They study the history, culture, and traditions of their people, as well as get acquainted with other cultures and ideas. Educated Shilluk people play an important role in changing traditions and in the fight for human rights. They advocate for the abolition of outdated customs, for equality between men and women, for democracy, and for social justice. Education is the key to progress and to building a better future for the Shilluk people. It allows them to preserve their cultural heritage, adapt traditions to modern conditions, and build a society based on the principles of justice and equality. In conclusion, the tradition of choosing women by the ref is a complex and controversial social phenomenon that needs to be understood in the context of the Shilluk culture and history. It has deep roots in the past, but it is gradually losing its relevance under the influence of globalization and modernization. The change of traditions should happen gradually and taking into account the opinions of all members of society. Education plays a key role in this process, as it allows us to preserve our cultural heritage, adapt traditions to modern conditions, and build a society based on the principles of justice and equality. Studying traditions like those of the Shilluk allows us to better understand the evolution of human communities and the influence of the environment on cultural development. It helps us to broaden our horizons, become more tolerant of other cultures, and better understand ourselves. After all, in the end, we are all part of one big human family, and studying the diversity of our cultures enriches us all.